Hello there, Del Cross here. I am here to finish out the anachronisms for May 2019. I've been doing them individually just to have as a side bar or part of the project that I've been working on called Anachronisms, which are posted on a blog, anachronisms.blogspot.com. That's ANACHRONIZMS.blogspot.com. And these were posted, this one particularly, May 26th, 2019. And these two are quite long and meandering for anachronisms. Usually anachronisms are not longer than like a page on a piece of paper. I'm at 8.5 by 11 if I were writing it. That was my original rule. These kind of got out of hand, and it was, the end of like pretty difficult times and whatever, This is called Some Thoughts on Inability, and it starts with a quote by John Ashbery, as I think all of the poems in this particular month did. Almost. Most of them. Say hi to Jock Itch. Quite a confessional kind of piece, I think this is, and maybe some troubling turns on a dime with subject matter. I'm not sure. You can be the judge of that. The hardest thing I have ever had to do is ask for money. I somehow found a way to do it on occasions too numerous for me to really dwell on at the moment. I find myself in a situation in which I may have to do it once more. Much as my life is much better than it has been in years. I have a roof over my head, my own little isolation tank, and it would be a difficult thing to lose it, even with my luck. But so it goes. Money. And I cannot begin to imagine what I would have done, nor what my life would be like, if I had not begun my habit of begging online. For some reason, it makes me think of my fear of flying. I started air travel in college with a trip from my home state of Arkansas to New Orleans, thanks to my good friend Don, who allowed me this one foray into the rich kid's way to do spring break, to my mind, by letting me use miles he had accumulated with business trips, of which this would be yet another one for him. For me, it was spring break. But it was very scary to me in those 4 airplanes. Imagine layovers in which one has to catch a next flight both to and from cities and adjacent states. I remember that there was some pretty bad turbulence on the second leg of that trip from Nashville to New Orleans. But for whatever reason, each time I got on an airplane after that, it became a worse experience, more difficult to force myself to even do. And this went on for about 4 trips until I could not do it anymore. And had never been anywhere but the U.S. and a bit of Canada, mostly all driving, of course. And I am perhaps suggesting that the fear of flying, am I perhaps suggesting that the fear of flying is something akin to the fear of asking for money, and perhaps just as ridiculous in its own way, given the much-known statistics of how you are much more likely to die in a car than on an airplane, and doing much more mundane things, apparently. Unfounded fears. Things that cause way too much stress for me to accommodate. In any case, I found the unfounded fear of flying quite absolute. Fortunately, I found a way to quell the fear after many years of polling folks, be they acquaintances, good friends, or total strangers, whenever I would learn that a person had the same fear. So, as common as it was, and as illogical, all I knew was that I wanted to see the world. And how would I do that without flying? So, for over a decade, I took a poll, so to speak, which had each person who actually overcame the fear, which was not every one of the group, of course, find a way to do it and survive. Finally, after that decade or so, I had enough research to finally settle on one of the most common ways these folks I would query, found to ease, if not rid, their fear of flying. And I went with it and can attest that I turned 40 in Paris on my first trip abroad, and have easily traveled in an airplane ever since. Or I did for about 7 years or so when I could afford it. This is very off the cuff, but my plan was for it to be humorous, this piece, of the importance of humor. I know that if I even have a point, I meander my way to it. But as for the humor, despite consciously realizing it must be an important part of my work, just as it had always been and continues to be in life, not to get into why that I came to such a pronounced conclusion about anything, but it had to do with the times during which I began to write seriously, and moving from Boston to San Francisco about that same time, and about why I read poetry in the first place. All in all, it is about me and my own fragile baby values, which also included things like honesty, which can mean many things to me. A guy who realizes it is literally non-existent on the whole. That did not have the straight truth again, if such a thing even exists, but about my own desire for being real, something I was taught was a virtue, but found no evidence of it, again, in whole whatsoever. I mean, quite the contrary. And along with that honesty, which was, I would call it honesty of experience and curiosity / imagination. So it was not even the nirvana of truth, but a truth that one might, like nirvana, aspire toward. So it was inflected and even aided with such things as my current mood, my imagination, and not only real events, but could be portrayed fictionally, so long as it was in some way perhaps too difficult to describe. Honest to me and honest of me. This would need to often include actual events, or at least the things that went on in my head because of whatever was going on around me, or despite of it, perhaps, and usually included somewhat nostalgic or emotional content, and what I may or may not have learned about that moment or experience, or just as a way to relay it, or what I was thinking. Also important was the gossipy stuff. A way many poets got under my skin by interesting me in their lives, wondering what was real, and if it was, how the rest of the story went. Hence my obsession with O'Hara, and as it turns out, in some ways even more so, at least as far as the amount of reading I do, one versus the other, the work of John Ashbery, certainly more so than I would have ever known when I first started puzzledly reading his books. But they have become a compendium, which I now think of in the same way as a child I thought of Bible, or probably more so the Chronicles of Narnia or the Lord of the Rings. Like any other form of art I had become attached to, the one thing I could not handle was that what little intelligence I may not actually have, that I not feel insulted or bruised by what I read or see in the cinema, or see or performed on the stage, or hear in the music to which I dance, etc. When the stars align, as they can more often than I would have thought at first do, even though the truth is that after finishing the first book by Ashbery, I certainly didn't think I would ever be reading anything by him again, which also propels my practice of reading that which I do not understand or even like, trying like hell to get something out of it. And let me assure you that this can, for me, lead to some wonderfully eye-popping moments of enlightenment. The exact opposite happens in, say, the juicy stuff, the esoterica. It makes me want to read biographies, essays, journals, whatever additional information I can get on whomever this poet was or is, who spoke so intimately and interestingly and humorously and gossipy, and often obviously out of love or extreme respect about quite often the same persons or on a regular basis, yet the obscure singular references become madly interesting as well. Many of whom I also desperately want to know, like I do the author. This practice is the stuff of basic academic research, of course, so is quite possible to do in most cases, as it turns out. Not always. And this desire has propelled me along on this trek almost as much as anything else I can think of. I call it engaging with an author, dead or alive, and it is the author I am most often hoping to get to know when I pick up a book of poetry, let me be specific, in the first place. Almost without fail, the desire is to engage. Anyway, there are other things too, but I was getting to humor, I think. And, oh yes, how important it was for me, even from the beginning, to make absolutely certain that my work and what I would editorially showcase had plenty of it. Humor. It just seemed something that was lacking. I've come through some recent times in which humor seems to be extraordinarily absent or unidentifiable at times to me. But looking back through this experience and back at my writing, both before and during the times, often when I do not even realize it, I mix very lowbrow humor with topics or storylines that are of great importance, perhaps severely so to me. So there is a bit of purpose to this method, of course, and a lot of it has to be about engaging, to give someone the opportunity I had to delight in getting to know my heroes. And after all, this is about me. So if I can get you with the fantastic jock itch epigraph at the top and you get this far, then there has been engagement. Debatable maybe, but I may never know you, but you can certainly know plenty about me if you read Roman numerals, for example. Just look at the number above each of the poems with numbers before that can be found right here. For those of you who may possibly want to know more, however, if you might be left at this point in this poem, for those of you who have never had any of them before, for example, there is ample means to know me much better. A lot of what I do, I am sure, is try to capture or mimic those things in those poems by the guys I mentioned earlier and many, many others that made me want to understand him or her, often to the point here it would literally feel as if we were friends who would often stay up together long into many an evening or night, talking, learning about one another. Makes me quite happy that I have not quite lost my sense of humor. I feel a bit incomplete when I offer something that is seemingly too heavy with the lack of it, but that seems important to me as well, or something that is just plain sappy, which here I am doing something like both of these examples and without a lick of humor, or much anyway. And while many of you may have gone further and gotten to know me personally, especially pursuant to reading or hearing something I wrote, that's huge to me. And I know how full of ego that might sound, but this method of trying to engage seems to be one of the most genuine ways to begin. For any of you I have jilted by not responding in a proper fashion, if you have already attempted to reach out to me, please try again. I do not prefer this life of solitude. There is no one to blame for it but myself, but however I might act elsewise, I do this as a catalyst for engagement, first and foremost. I never got to meet Mr. Ashbery unlike so many of the poetic heroes who have lived in my lifetime who have become friends or acquaintances, which I have at least had the opportunity to shake a hand of the poet and try to say they are, to me, hero directly to them. But I never even heard him read, not that I did not have ample opportunity. I think it might be just because I was literally too in awe to bring myself to be there. But while he can surely no longer hear me and my feelings about him, there is still engagement between us. And it is not just one, subsided to me. And I feel much better, feel a much better person for picking up that second and third and fourth book and reading and rereading many more. So thank you very, very much, John. Even and especially for the jock itch. And thank you too. Thank you too. May you never leave the word, including its truth and its hopeful humor and all of the rest of its wonder. There she goes.